This session is on constructors. So let's take the same person example. In order to create an object, we have person P is equal to new person of, and then we create the object with the default values, and we initialize the object by using P dot first name equal to John, P dot last name equal to Peter, and then P dot age is equal to 19. So what we are trying to do is creating an object and trying to initialize that object. So when the object is getting created, it will have default values. Now we are replacing that default values with whatever values we supply. So this object initialization can be done by means of a constructor, with the help of a constructor. And the purpose of constructor is to do object state initialization. So in this example of person, what we are trying to do here is we create a person object and we initialize the person object in our main method. So we try to do p dot first name, p dot last name, like that. We are trying to initialize the object in the main method. So instead of initializing the object in the main method, we can move that logic, the 3 lines of assignment statement, we can move that logic into an instance method. So here I'm creating an instance method called add person, which receives 3 arguments, and that 3 arguments is going to be assigned to the instance variables. So first name is equal to fn, last name equal to ln, age is equal to n, where fn, ln, n is the parameters that I receive. And how do you call this method is just by the object p dot add person, and then pass the actual values. So the actual values Jim Peter 19 is going to be replaced with is going to be given to the parameters fn, ln, and n, and fn, ln, n is going to be assigned to the instance variable. So basically the 3 statements whatever we did earlier in the main method, p dot first name, p dot last name equal to, those things has been moved to a method, and I'm just calling the method. So how it simplifies my job? Like if I wanted to create 5% objects, I don't need to repeat that 3 statements 5 times. Instead, I can call the method add person 5 times actually. So it will be like p1 dot add person, p2 dot add person, p3 dot add person, like that. I can call them by passing the 3 values. Okay, so this is a job basically the constructor performs. So instead of having public void add person, I can have a constructor for that. So constructor is nothing but it is just like a method which does not have a return type, which is going to have the same name as the class name. So constructor does not return anything. It does not return void or int or something like that. It is not going to return anything, and you will not have a return statement basically, since it is not returning anything. And it doesn't mean it is a void type, but it is not having any return type itself. So here the public void add person is going to be replaced with just the person, where this person is nothing but whatever you have as the public class name, that the same name you have to have it as the constructor name. So here so we are changing our method instance method to a constructor here. All the other things remains the same. So how do you change the calling? Like I cannot now call with p dot add person. Instead I'm going to replace the new person of. If you see new person of and then there is a braces there, that is nothing but it is calling the person constructor. But this person constructor is not is having some arguments to it. So the person of should be replaced with the actual values. So instead of calling add person, I just moved the Jim Peter 19 the actual values into the part where I am creating the object. So here I create the object, I initialize the values while I create the object itself. I don't need to write a separate method for initializing it. I do that as part of the construction creation activity. So let's see what is this means here. Um, think about, I have the parameter variables as first name, last name, age. Instead of having fn, ln, and n, I'm just going to have it as first name, last name, and age. If I do that, what is going to happen? When I assign it, first name equal to first name, last name equal to last name, we don't know whether the parameter variables is assigned to the instance variable or instance variable is getting the parameterized values. So it is basically we will have that ambiguity, since both the parameter name whatever we are passing is the same as the instance name. So it will be a confusing thing whether the instance value is given to the parameter variable or the parameter variable value is given to the instance variable. So that to avoid this confusion, we can go ahead with having this dot in front of the instance variable. So when you put this dot, that means it represents the instance variable. This means the current instance. So if you are calling person P is equal to new person of, P is the current instance, right? So this corresponds to the current instance what you are calling it with. So you always call a methods with the instance. So this represents the current instance. So even though now if you pass the first name as the same name as the parameter name, the same name as the instance name, still we will be able to differentiate here by using the this keyword. So now I am very clear, this dot first name means the instance value is going to get the parameter value. So this refers to the current instance. Let's talk about the default constructors. Let's say I have a person object and I'm just going to call this person object. Let's imagine I don't have any constructors here. I just have a person class which is having some five properties: first name, last name, middle name, email, and age. So I don't have any constructors. Now I do person P is equal to new person of. Remember, person of is, there is no constructor, I'm having it in my class, but still I'm creating an object by using new person of, which is not taking any arguments there. And I print P dot first name, P dot last name, P dot email, and age. So what is going to be the output? I'm going to get the output of null, null, NA, and 0. So by default, when you create the object, the string values are going to be initialized with null. Any object will be initialized with null. And then you're going to get any integers will be initialized with 0, and floats will be initialized with 0.0. So basically they are the initial values when you create an object. If you see here, I get null for first name and last name, but I get NA for email. Why I get NA for email is because I initialize email is equal to NA here. So since I have initialized the instance variable as NA, anytime you create the object, it is going to get the initial value of NA here. Whereas the other cases is going to get null because I didn't initialize any value. So it is going to get the default value here. Okay, so I created an object. I don't have any constructors, but still I'm able to create an object and there is some initial values given to it. So what is actually going to happen is, here person of is getting called. So I didn't put any constructor. So if I didn't give any constructor, if there are no constructor given by the user, the compiler is going to provide the constructor for us. So this happens whenever I don't write any constructor in the sense I don't write any no argument constructor, as well as I don't have any parameterized constructor. I don't put any constructors. If I don't have any constructor, compiler is going to give this constructor to us. So this constructor is a no argument constructor. You can also call default constructor. And this constructor is not going to have any initialization code. It is just going to have one statement which is called super of, which we'll be learning in a while. So this is going to be provided by this. So now if you see person P is equal to new person of, so you could see that person of is basically calling this compiler given constructor, which is in turn calling super of. We'll see what is super of. But remember, if you are not writing the constructor, compiler is going to give you the constructor. That is the reason the new person of is working for us. Here also it is calling the constructor without any arguments, but we have not written it. Compiler is providing it since we have not written it constructor. Okay, and let's say we are now writing this constructor. We write a no argument constructor, person of. I didn't get any arguments, but I just put person of, and I wanted to give some default values. I don't want to have the first name and last name as null, but I wanted to have it as first name is equal to test and last name is equal to test. So what will happen here? So when I run the same program again, I'm going to get the output as test, test, and then the email is going to be coming as NA because I have assigned as NA, but first name and last name is going to be changed to test because and not as null here. Only the middle name will be null. The first name and last name is going to get the value of test because the constructor, when you call new person of, it is going to call the constructor person, and we have written a code to change the first name and last name to test here. Let's see about constructor overloading. So as it is very similar concept like the method overloading that we saw in the previous session. So we have a code. If you see the code, there is a person, the person of, which is no argument constructor. There's no arguments to it, and it is having a first name equal to test and last name equal to test. The second constructor, it takes three arguments, first name, last name, and age, and assigns that to the instance variable. The third constructor is having five arguments. It is having first name, last name, middle name, email, and age, and it is assigning to the instance variables. So how do we call this? We write a main method, and the main method is calling person p1 is equal to new person of, which is going to call the no argument constructor. Person p2 is equal to new person of Maria, Patrick, 34. We are passing three arguments here, so it is going to call the overloaded constructor of three arguments. The third constructor is passing five arguments, so it is going to call the five argument constructor. So I wanted to print the objects basically. So what I do is I wrote a static method, static void print, and pass the person object to that actually. So I want to print all P1, P2, P3. So instead of repeating the system.out.println multiple times, I wrote it as a method, and this method is invoked couple of times here. So print of P1, what is going to happen? So I'm printing the person1 object. So it is going to print test null 0 na. Why test null 0 na? So person of is going to call the no argument constructor. No argument constructor is having first name is equal to test and last name equal to test. That is the reason we are getting test. Whereas the middle name is null, so we are getting null. Email was assigned earlier equal to na, so we are getting na. And age is 0. So when I print P2, what is going to happen is it is going to print, it is already taking first name, last name, and age. So Maria will be the first name, last name will be Patrick, and age will be 34. The middle name is going to be null, and age is equal, and email is equal to na. When I print the third object, P3, it is going to have populate all these values, Michelle Johnson, T17, and mgt@gmail.com. So it is going to populate all these values. So constructors can be overloaded just like the method overloading. So if a person wants to create an object without passing any arguments, they can use a no argument constructor. If he has just few values, he doesn't have a middle name and email, still he can use he can initialize the object with just whatever he has with him. So he's going to go with Maria, Patrick, and 34, just the first name, last name, and age. He doesn't have a middle name and email, so he is not passing them. The other person is having all the details, so he's calling the other overloaded constructor and getting all the details populated for the object. Let's see about what is the super keyword here is. So in the earlier example, we had a no argument constructor which is populating first name equal to test and last name equal to test. So what is going to happen in reality is the first line of the constructor, any constructor, the first line will be either super of or this of. In this case, I didn't put super of or this of here, but even if I don't put super of, compiler is going to put the super of for me. So if you put it, compiler is not going to do anything. But if you don't put super of, it is going to add super of as the first line of your statement in the constructor. It is for any constructor. If you put super of, it is not going to disturb you. It's going to leave the code as it is. If you have this of there, it is not going to disturb. But if you don't have this of or super of, it is going to put super of as a first line of statement. We'll see what is super of. But this of also we are going to see in the next slide actually. So compiler will add super of if there is no super of or this of in the first line of the constructor. What is super of here means it is going to call the super class constructor, that is means the parent class constructor. So person is not inheriting from any class, which means that it is basically inheriting from the parent class called object. So as we see in the last session, if you don't put it, if you are not extending from any class, compiler is going to extend it from the object class. It is going to already add a statement like person extends object. So when you say super of, it is going to call the it is going to call the super class constructor. Here the super class is nothing but object. Next is the constructor chaining. So we have the same program here, what we see before. We have a no argument constructor, we have a 3 argument constructor and 5 argument constructor. So If you see inside this program, the first line of statement is super of. If you don't give it, compiler is going to put it actually. So you will not see that, but it will be doing while it generates the bytecode. If you put it, that's fine. It is going to leave it as such. So now let's talk about what is this of here and how the propagation performs here. So let's say if I am doing person, hold on. Let's talk about this. Um, First name equal to test and last name equal to test is going to be initialized here, right? And if you see, the same thing is done in the next constructor also, in the further constructor also. So instead of doing the same, repeating the same code in all these constructors, I can delegate the call to the next constructor so that it can initialize it. So how the delegation can happen is by means of this statement. So if you put this of test comma 10, here what I mean is I'm calling the 3 argument constructor from the no argument constructor. So I pass the arguments test 10 means it is going to call the person with string first name, last name and age. So it is going to get the test value. Test value will be substituted to the first name. The next test value will be substituted to the last name. 10 will be substituted as age actually, and it is going to create a person object. Again, if you see, the 5 argument constructor is having all the 3 statements what we had for the 3 argument constructor. So we can do there also one this here. So even now if I create person p1 is equal to new person of, what is going to happen? It is going to call this of test comma 10, which means it is going to call the person constructor with 3 arguments, and that is going to create the object with the first name as test and last name as test and age is 10. Okay. Now I can replace this and call the 5 argument constructor from the 3 argument constructor. So it is again delegating to the, when you call the 3 argument constructor, this is delegating to the 5 argument constructor. So now the reason there is no need to do like this, we can have it as this dot itself. But if you want to simplify your code and have the assigning logic at one place, we can do like this. So whenever you get a call to the 3 argument constructor, it is going to delegate to the 5 argument constructor. Whenever you get a call to the no argument constructor, it is going to delegate that to the 3 argument constructor, and the 3 argument constructor is in turn going to delegate the call to the 5 argument constructor. So now if I call the 3 argument constructor, it is going to delegate the call to the 5 argument constructor. So it is going to replace the value of first name, last name and age, whatever it receives, and then it is going to give the default values of empty and test@test.com for middle name and email. So here are the rules. Constructor is going to have the same name as the class name, and constructor does not have any return type, and it is also not going to return anything back to the caller. And constructors can be overloaded. Super of or this of should be the first statement in the constructor. And if no constructor is provided, compiler will add a no argument constructor. And if super of or this of is not the first line of the constructor, compiler is going to add super of as the first line in the constructor. So these are the rules that will be followed by the constructors of the program. So let's try to do this in Eclipse. Just opening the Eclipse. So we'll take the same person class. So let me create it newly in a new package, new class. Okay, so person class, and then it's not accepting because it's already having person class in the inheritance package. So I'm going to put it in constructor package. I'm going to create a new package, constructors, and say finish. So here I'm going to have private, okay, ignore private, we'll talk about this later. String first name, I'm sorry, string first name, string last name, integer age, and I will also add string middle name, string email. So I have added 2 more variables. So now how to create the constructors for this? You don't need to type it. Basically, you can go to a file and source, and then go to constructed using fields here. Click on this, and you're going to get choose whichever variables you want to be as part of the constructor. So I want to create a no argument constructor, so I'm deselecting it all and then create generate. So which is going to create a no argument constructor for me. And I can also create a few more constructors, which is 3 argument and 5 argument. So I will take email and age out and create one more constructor. So this is my 3 argument constructor, and I'll create a 5 argument constructor. Generate constructor using fields, and now just say generate. So you get no argument constructor, 3 argument constructor, and 5 argument constructor. So in the no argument constructor, I'm going to add like this dot. So let's say we'll do something like I'm just going to remove this no argument constructor at this point of time. Just I'm going to remove it for some time. So I have a 3 argument as well as I have a 5 argument constructor. So let's now try to create a person test class. So how do I do that? New class, try typing person test, and check this main. So now I create a person object. Person p is equals new person of. The moment I say that, it is going to give me an error. Okay, why it is giving me an error? This is because if you see in the person class, I have a person with 3 arguments and I have a person with 5 arguments. I don't have a person constructor with 0 arguments, right? It doesn't have anything with the 0 arguments, and that is the reason it is basically complaining me that I cannot create this object. But if at all I don't have any constructor, let's say I'm going to remove all these constructors. If I don't have any constructors, then this will not give me an error. Why? Because as I said, if you don't have any constructors, compiler is going to give you the no argument constructor. So when you call the no argument constructor from here, it is not going to create any problems. But the moment you started introducing any constructor, that time compiler is not going to provide you any no argument constructor. It is your responsibility. If you need it, you have to provide it. If you don't want it, you have to basically pass the values here. You cannot create objects without passing the values. So depends upon your requirements whether you wanted to have a no argument constructor or not. But depending upon your requirement, you can proceed forward and add the no argument constructors. So here the problem is, if I don't want the no argument constructor here, I cannot create an object like this. Either two ways to fix this is either you create a no argument constructor in person so that this code will work, or you have to use the existing constructor, either a 3 argument or a 5 argument constructor. So let me make it as Jim. And first name, last name, then age. So now, okay. Okay, I think I didn't define. Oh, that's my mistake. So I defined with only the first name, last name, and middle name, not the age. So either we can replace this, or you can just fix it with just give name alone. Just give a name, middle name alone, empty. Okay, so now this is working because I satisfied the constructor here. Okay, let's try to do a class called employee and see what happens here. New class employee and say finish. So till this point I don't have any problems, but the moment I say this employee is going to extend person. So I didn't do anything. I just extend the person, but it is giving me a error. So why this error happens? I didn't do anything. I didn't call any of the constructors. Nothing I did, but still I got an error. So if you see the error, it's going to say implicit super constructor person is undefined for default constructor. So basically what it is trying to say here is, as we know, if you don't give any constructor, what is going to happen? Java is going to provide you the constructor. So I mean the compiler is going to provide you the constructor. So how it is going to give you? It is going to give you a constructor like this. It's going to give you the constructor like this, and it is going to have the any constructor will have the super off as the first statement if it is not having this off. Okay, so now it is going to happen. Now the problem is this, with this statement. When a compiler is issuing this, when you don't give any constructor, compiler is going to give you this constructor, and when it is giving this constructor, the first statement is called a super off. So what is super off means? It is going to call the super class constructor that is having no arguments. You are not passing any arguments here. So it is going to call the super class constructor without arguments. So who is the super class? Person. So when you go to person, do you have any person constructor without any arguments? You don't have any constructor called person without any arguments. So that is the reason it is complaining you. So how do we fix this? Again, two ways you can fix this. You go to person class and then put a no argument constructor. That will fix the problem. So if you say person off, when you introduce this and save it, now this error is gone. That is one way to fix it. But if you don't want that, you don't want a person to be created without giving first name, last name. If you don't want to create a person without doing this, then the next option is you will get an error, but you can pass the dummy values like for creating it, because you have only the 3 argument constructor, so you can give some dummy values for creating the constructor. So you can say super off and give the values. That means it is going to call the person constructor that is taking 3 arguments there actually. So either of this way you can fix this problem. So constructor basically is going to create an object and it is going to initialize your variables. And when you create this employee object, what is going to happen is basically employee object will not be automatically created. First it is going to create the person object. So whenever you are calling a class to create an object, so here if I say employee equal to new employee of, it is going to call this constructor first, and the first statement of this constructor is super off. So what is super off is going to do is it goes to the person class and it is going to call that constructor, and that constructor is going to again call the super off, which is going to go to the object class, which is responsible for creating the objects. It has methods to create the objects. It has the underlying JVM methods to create the objects. So first the person object is created and then the employee object is created. So it is basically going to create all the parent classes objects followed by the child class objects. So that's how the object creation works, or the constructor is getting changed to call till the object class. And as we said, you can also, instead of doing this both three, it is repeated, this 3 codes is repeated here and here, right? So instead we can simply remove this. You cannot have super and this. So this off, you can say first name comma middle name, first name comma last name comma middle name. Okay. So with that you need to pass the age as something and the email as something, right? So email I'm making it as empty, and then age as I'm giving as 0. So I can initialize this values like this. I think it's taking email and age. Yeah, that's good. So why this is having a problem is because you can have either super off or this off as the first statement, not both actually. So if you have super off, you cannot have this off. This dot is different from this off. This off is just calling the same constructor, the overloaded constructor. It is just delegating the call to another constructor. It's not going to, before going to the superclass. Okay, hope this is clear.